And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the fastest 2 hours in talk radio. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show. Just because we're being exterminated doesn't mean we can't make it fun. Otherwise, what's the point of being killed? And my very special guest joining me now is James Corbett of the Corbett Report, not to be confused with Eddie Murphy's Norbit Report. James, welcome to the program.
Or the Colbert Report, which thankfully I outlasted him. I showed him who's boss.
Yeah. He probably had to do a cold beer report after that one to drink away his sorrows. Scumbag. Anyway, I'd like to just hear from you a little bit about who you are and what you do for those who are uninitiated. And I also want to make the point, ladies and gentlemen, you really want to search for a James Corbett video about 9/11. It's just a fantastic job you've done there, bro.
Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah, for people who don't know, I'm James Corbett. I'm at CorbettReport.com. I've been working in Japan for 11 years now. This is my 11th year, and I've been doing the Corbett Report since 2007. It originally started out, it was just going to be a weekly podcast, but it quickly became interviews and articles and videos, and it's just expanded and expanded since then, and now I'm writing for the International Forecaster. I have another website, FukushimaUpdate.com, talking about the latest at the Fukushima Daiichi plant. I do all sorts of video reports for Boiling Frogs Post and Global Research TV and other places. So I'm a little bit of everywhere. I hope you've found me online somewhere before, even if you didn't know it was me.
I wanted to actually hear a little bit about Fukushima because I've heard a lot of things. Now, first story that I hear is it's real bad, everything's screwed, it's virtual extinction level event, ranging from all the way to, oh, there's absolutely no radiation and that's completely fine. What do you think?
Yeah, oddly enough, I fall somewhere in between that. No, I don't believe this is extinction level event. No, I do not believe everything is peachy keen. And basically, what should people believe? Well, how about looking at some of the evidence for what actually exists? So it has been confirmed that the radioactive plume has reached the West Coast. And so this has been confirmed by testing by an independent organization called Our Radioactive Ocean that's being organized. It's being basically crowdfunded to do testing off of the west coast of the United States because there is no agency of the U.S. or Canadian government that is currently actively involved in testing the Western Pacific. So this has absolutely confirmed the radioactive plume has reached the west coast of North America as expected. But the levels of radiation that have been detected are, extremely low. And people can look into that for themselves and come to their own conclusions. But I've got a bunch of information up on that about that on FukushimaUpdate.com. I think a great video that really puts it into perspective is called Fukushima West Coast Impact. It's by Goddard's Journal. And it has links to a couple of dozen different studies that have been done and basically talking about dosages and how much has been detected and how much is likely to do damage. Puts it into perspective, historically speaking, back when they were doing open atmospheric testing out in the Pacific, what were the levels back then, and how does that compare to what we find now with Fukushima? Basically, the people, I think, who were making the extinction level die off, everything's going to hell in a handbasket type of claims, have greatly exaggerated a lot of this and have used a lot of faulty information in the past and never retracted their claims. So I think there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes on. And why not? It's ka-ching, ka-ching, because obviously people who are seeking out alternative media love to hear some of the fear porn and doom and gloom and will tend to believe that without much presentation of evidence. So I get why that happens. On the other side of things, of course, TEPCO and the Japanese government wants to downplay the situation as much as possible and makes everything sound like it's wonderful and tickety-boo because, they've got the 2020 Olympics coming up and all of this where they're going to try to convince the world that everything's under control. Whereas we do have radioactive water leaking out from the site on a daily basis into the ocean. That is known, that's confirmed, there's nothing conspiratorial about that. And the underlying problem of the entire situation their melted down cores is still a problem. And it will be for the foreseeable future, because the technology to even approach the cores, to even look at them, see where they are lying, does not yet exist. It literally doesn't yet exist. So there's no possibility that they're actually going to be taking care of those cores, actually getting them out of there, actually containing them anytime in the near future either.
Does the technology even exist to do it?
No, it does not. It absolutely does not. And we get this from a lot of different places, but there was a post that I always go back to on Washington's blog back in 2012 that I posted up on Fukushima Update as well. Top nuclear experts, technology doesn't yet exist to clean up Fukushima. And it cites a number of different reports from a number of different people. For example, Hiroshi Tasaka of Tama University, who was talking about the government's trying to remove rods and from the spent fuel pool, but the need to develop new technology to mitigate the risk of aftershocks was still needed at that time. We had some of the main contractors who have been hired to help clean up the site, including Energy Solutions, said the head, the top boss of that company, said there is no technology which can be directly applied to extract fuel debris from Fukushima. You had the William Magwood of the telling the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works there will need to be new technologies and new methodologies created to be able to enable them to clean the site up. And some of those technologies don't exist yet, so there's a long way to go with that. Again, the quotes just keep coming and coming. So yes, no, the technology doesn't exist. They're trying all sorts of crazy things. People might have heard about the ice wall idea, where they were literally going to try to freeze the ground to stop groundwater from running through the site and spilling out into the ocean. That was a failure. They're now going to try a shape-changing robot to try to get anywhere near the reactor core, I believe in Unit 1, to try to see where it's lying. But again, they're just trying these types of experimental technologies out, and radiation levels near the cores are just too high, and every robot and camera and whatever they've sent in so far has failed.
A shape-changing robot, where'd they get that idea? Michael Bay?
I was going to say James Cameron, but, either way.
So the technology doesn't exist. So regardless of how dangerous or how benign the Fukushima situation is, there's nothing we can do about it just yet.
Not yet. Nope. Absolutely not. So yes, the underlying problem of the site cannot be addressed right now. Not even is not being addressed, cannot be addressed right now. And everything else that we hear about, all of the new developments that we hear about, are really just symptoms of the underlying problem. So when we hear about the radioactive water going out in the ocean, well, of course, that's just a symptom of the fact that the cores are still exposed somewhere in these complexes, and as the groundwater goes through the site, it's being contaminated and then running out into the ocean. And they're trying to collect this water, and they're collecting it in tanks on the site, but those tanks are leaking and breaking and filling up quickly, and it's just, there's so many different aspects to this disaster that it's difficult to even know where to begin addressing it, but the point remains that the underlying point, the underlying cause of all of this has not and cannot be addressed.
And do you think it was actually caused, as Benjamin Fulford claimed, by an earthquake weapon?
I would like to see the evidence for that.
Wouldn't we all? The other question I wanted to ask about Fukushima, you're saying that it's not really as bad as it's being made out. How bad is it? Are we having people getting sick around the Fukushima Daiichi area? Or are we having workers down there die from the exposure, something like that?
No one has officially died from radiation exposure. There have been a number of workers, several workers who have died on site from various accidents, but no one has officially died from officially concluded radiation poisoning or what have you. But there have been people who have dropped dead with heart attacks and things that have just been explained by stress or what have you. So I think we should take that with a grain of salt. There's been research on thyroid cancer. There's been an increase in the detection basically of the number of cases of thyroid cancer in children in Fukushima area. But people are saying, well, that's because there's an unprecedented screening that's going on right now. And that screening is basically finding more examples of not necessarily thyroid cancer, but the early signs of what could be, basically lymph nodes or whatever that could be cancerous or become cancerous, and that's being detected more because they're doing more testing for it. So there's that argument. There was that case with the U.S. naval officers who were suing the U.S. government for basically positioning their naval carrier in the area at the time of the Fukushima disaster, and people were complaining of various ailments, physical ailments. As far as I know, that case is still ongoing. I don't believe there's been any developments in it. But then there are the people on the other side who say, well, a lot of these things that they're talking about are not symptoms of radiation poisoning and are things that only developed years after the events, not at the time when you would have expected acute radiation poisoning to be setting in. There's always arguments on both sides, so I'll let people out there come to their own conclusions. They're all big boys and girls. They can decide what they believe themselves. In terms of, are there mass die-offs of people all over Japan? Well, no, and I can attest to that from my own daily life of being 400 miles, 700 kilometers southwest of the reactors. No, there are no mass die-offs or anything happening here. And in fact, one of the doctors who actually recently left Tokyo, there was a lot of stories in the alt media about this. There was a doctor who left Tokyo saying that Tokyo has been basically contaminated because of some of this runoff and fallout. But he actually left Tokyo to come to the city where I live. So if anything's a good sign, I think it would be something like that. So it's not like Japan is one big nuclear waste site, or at least not significantly more so than it was before, which is to say there are all sorts of nuclear waste and radiation problems all over the world that are at this point being ignored by a lot of the people who claim to be against the nuclear energy industry, because they are concentrating on Fukushima to the exclusion of other huge problems. There was a huge leak at the Hanford nuclear site in the western United States last year that has been completely ignored by the alternative media because Fukushima. The Sellafield nuclear power plant remains an ongoing cancerous sore on the planet, even after its decommissioning, because of the Irish Sea is in fact the most radioactive sea in the world, but you wouldn't know that because Fukushima.
That's why they call it. That's why they call it the Emerald Isle.
Yeah, it certainly glows in the dark, more so than it used to. All of these things, as I say, are basically being ignored because people are concentrating only on Fukushima. And I think that the bigger problem of nuclear energy generally is that even if there isn't the meltdown, I mean, obviously meltdowns are not a good thing. Obviously that's a problem. Obviously we have to be aware of it. But I think that even without the meltdowns, there are huge problems related to the nuclear industry, and that the nuclear industry is nothing other than a fraud that's been perpetrated on the public for over, well, 70 years now, more or less.
Could you explain?
On the basis... Sorry?
Could you explain?
Hello?
Like how
Yes.
how is the whole nuclear
Absolutely.
industry?
Well, where did the idea for nuclear reactors and energy too cheap to meter and all of this come from? This was all developed by the U.S. Naval Research, who were basically looking for ways to power nuclear submarines and what have you. So the original reactor designs were designed in naval research laboratories and with the active support of U.S. naval researchers, and then that ultimately gets filtered down to the public and promoted through the Atoms for Peace project. And people should look into the history of that project and basically how it was CIA propaganda that was used to sell that technology around the world under the slogan "Energy too cheap to meter. It's going to be the nuclear age. Yay! We've harnessed the power of the atom, and you'll never have to pay for electricity again." And all of this garbage that was used to sell this idea and sell these reactors around the world. But the interesting thing about nuclear energy is, one, it is not economically feasible, and two, it is a wonderful way of producing material for nuclear weapons. Of course, how are you going to produce all of this plutonium for the nuclear weapons? How are you going to refine all that uranium? Nuclear reactors, like the kinds used in nuclear power plants, are a wonderful production technique to get that plutonium. So basically, all of this nuclear energy industry and the promotion of it was done by the U.S. government and intelligence agencies as part of a longer-term plan to make this an adjunct of the nuclear weapons industry, and that's what it is at base. And that's why, for example, Japan, although officially a non-nuclear country in the nuclear weapons sense, could become one at the flip of a switch, basically, because they have enough plutonium refined here through their reactors that they could actually create nuclear weapons if they wanted to. And that's the point. Any country that says they have a peaceful nuclear energy program is lying. Nuclear energy is really just used as an excuse, as a backdoor for a nuclear weapons program. It always has been. It always is. That's the only reason the nuclear energy industry exists. And that's something that's being neglected to a large extent when people talk about nuclear energy.
Well, I guess blowing people to pieces is one way of creating peace.
Yeah. Peace, yes, indeed, the operative word. And people should ask themselves, how did a country like Japan, the only country to suffer a nuclear bombing in wartime, embraced nuclear power so completely that it's now, it has been for a long time, the primary way of generating electricity here, although not for the last couple of years since they shut all the plants down. It's because there was a coordinated campaign which includes documentable CIA liaisons working with the major newspaper publishers here in Japan to sell this idea to the public that nuclear power was going to be the way of the future. And it was eventually embraced because of a large degree of collusion between the government and the nuclear energy industry here. And that's exactly why the nuclear regulators, quote unquote, who were supposed to be looking over and looking at issues like what was occurring and what was coming up in Fukushima, that shouldn't have ever happened. And why did it happen? It's because the nuclear energy industry and the nuclear regulators are one and the same here in Japan, exactly as they are in the United States, exactly as they are in every country around the world, because it's a giant con game that's being played.
Yeah,
and that's the real secret of nuclear power.
It's the fox building their hen house, and I'm sure this all happened at a time when the US influence on Japan after the war was just at its peak. We'll be right back after the break with my special guest, James Corbett from thecorbettreport.com. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinnie Eastwood Show. It's true, I am no Superman, but laser beams do shoot out of my eyes if I see David Rockefeller. My very special guest is James Corbett from the Corbett Report, been running for quite some time now, and is, in terms of the, broader alternative media, one of the best voices. That kind of thing. And you must really appreciate people who do their due diligence, do the work, and accept the facts, rather than trying to manipulate them in order to click whore, which is quite the frustrating thing about some sections of the alternative media. James, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Yes. Now, we were talking.
I don't know how to respond to that.
It matters not. We were talking over the break about accusations and things like that. Now, when you're getting attacked for telling the truth, it's not going to stop you telling the truth. No more than when you're walking home and it starts raining, do you stop walking home? And people have got to realise this, especially newcomers into the alternative media field. If you're not shilling BS for a living, you will be accused of being a shill, ironically enough. And with those people, first you laugh at them, then you ridicule them, and then you block them, and you never hear from them again. But unfortunately, there's so many of them out there that you can't possibly block them all, and it's kind of part of the gig, isn't it?
It certainly is. If you're not being accused of being some sort of shill for some sort of agenda, then you either haven't been on the internet long enough or you're doing something wrong, because basically everyone gets accused of that at some point. If you have a ridiculously thin skin and can't basically treat those types of accusations for what they're worth, then you probably shouldn't be involved in this, because ultimately that's going to happen at some point, whether you're putting out YouTube videos or whatever, or whether you're just participating in a forum conversation. And it is an unfortunate tendency of the alt media, isn't it, that those types of accusations are just so quick to come, that anyone who doesn't precisely and in every aspect agree completely with what you think is automatically a government shill. And it's unfortunate. I understand why that happens, because there are documented and verifiable government programs to plant fake people on the internet. That we know that Israel and others have been doing that. That's an openly documented programs. We know about COINTELPRO and the FBI and how they've for decades inserted people into various groups, but they don't do that anymore, right? Wink, wink. So we know that exists. We know about cognitive infiltration and all this, but unfortunately, it just leads to the atmosphere that if someone doesn't agree with everything that you say, think, and believe, they must be a shill, and that's unfortunate. But again, it is what it is, and if you're bothered by that, then yeah, you probably shouldn't be looking into the truth, because you're going to get a lot of that kind of kickback.
It's unavoidable. It's inevitable, more or less. And I found another element is that newcomers try to become famous and big very quickly by exposing somebody who's already big, who's already there, and just go, oh, this person's really bad, etc. And you know that you've become successful when people gain an audience off of attacking you.
Yeah, and yeah, again, I understand how that works, and it's quite a natural phenomenon that people who become big and famous are going to get attacked more, and so again, I understand how all this works, and I understand why it's so. I understand why it's so tempting for people who are up and coming to do that as well, because as you say, it does get sort of instant audience for people to, oh, I'm exposing this person, so you better watch me, and it works, and that's why people do it. But I think ultimately that type of thing, ultimately an audience will see through, whether if you actually have something valuable to contribute or not. And it might take a month, it might take a year, it might take a few years, but eventually an audience will see through if you have nothing in your bag of tricks other than everyone else is wrong, just trust me.
It's just the arrogance and the stupidity of it, eh? And it's not just on the part of those people who actually build careers out of that sort of thing, but also the audiences sometimes are. Let's just face facts here. There's a lot of crazy people on the internet. It's pretty well documented that society is getting crazier by the day, and if you are trying to speak in a sane manner, you make yourself a target. But anyway, moving on from this, you seem to be able to deal with it very well, James, like water off a duck's back. Have you ever had one of those days where you're like, you know what, I'm just going to take the day off. I just can't be bothered with this stuff.
You get days like that. I mean, obviously, when it just seems, well, what's the point of this? But obviously, it hasn't had that ultimate effect on me in the end yet, and I don't imagine it will by this point. I think I've heard every accusation there is and had every type of feedback and kickback. One that's particularly interesting to me now is that I've basically dedicated my work this year towards looking at solutions and looking at things we can actually do and affect and change in our lives and how we can actually make this world a better place. I've been really trying to dedicate more and more of my work to that this year, and now I'm starting to get kickback against that. You know, oh, well, you're trying to look at solutions. Well, oh, that must mean you're starting to get a big head and you're trying to tell us what to do and things like this. And I was like, okay, well, anything that I try to do, people are going to kick back against. But again, it really doesn't fundamentally bother me because I'm not in this for any sort of outside verification or approval. I think that's the thing. I mean, I got into this when 9/11, saying 9/11 was an inside job was still something a bit transgressive about that. That was not a popular thing back when I started saying this, and I always expected a lot of kickback against my work. And interestingly, I mean, once you start to build up an audience, that audience, of course, is with you because they agree with your core beliefs, like 9/11 truth or what have you. And it's actually been for a long time. I've had a lot of audience that really agrees with a lot of what I'm saying, which is almost, in a way, it's uncomfortable because I got into this to be transgressive and to say things that people didn't want to hear, and here I am with maybe preaching too much to the choir. But don't worry, I guarantee anyone who comes across me and thinks, oh, I like what he's saying, there will be a point at which I say something you disagree with. Don't worry, it will come. It's just a question of how we handle that and whether we can have mature adult conversations on the internet with people we disagree or not. So, and I'm confident that can happen. And yeah, there are crazy people, there are unreasonable people, there are people who you can't reason with, and they will unfortunately usually be the vocal minority. But I think there is a majority of people out there who are sane, who are rational, who can understand these things. And I do have faith that the audience sees through baloney eventually. And on the whole, obviously there are people who slip through the cracks, but what are you going to do?
What I like about you is you don't tend to get too overly emotional on it. You kind of always remain very composed when you're doing your shows and your broadcasts. You don't, like me, sometimes I'll like yell or scream, or, occasionally it'll get ahead of me and I might actually accidentally swear or something. And I think that's because I just haven't kind of matured enough to a degree.
I don't know what to say about that other than it's just my temperament, and I can't be anything other than what I am. I'm not a kind of person who's going to get overly emotional anyway, so it's just the way I am, and this is just the way I respond to it, and that appeals to some people, it doesn't to others. I know some people like the emotional response, and why not? I mean, we should be passionate about what's going on, and if you're the type of person who gets passionate and carried away, then I think there will be people out there who will respond to that. And my underlying point in all of this has always been, I don't really, I have a way of delivering this information that some people will like and others won't, and I don't really care if people do or don't. I really just care that they get the information itself. So if you get it from me or you get it from someone else, just find the information, and if you need to find someone who delivers it in the right way for you, that's fine and understandable, and I think we all have to do that to some extent.
What did you do for before all of this started happening for you? I mean, were you like doing a normal job, 9 to 5, like everybody else, or what happened?
Sure was, yeah. I was a teacher here in Japan. For a few years, I was teaching in a private company here. It was the largest private teaching company in Japan. So teaching everyone from junior high kids all the way up to elderly retired people, basically conversational English. And then I switched into the public school system, elementary and junior high, and did that for a few years. And then for the last few years, I have been able to do this full time, thanks to the support of my listeners and subscribers and people who donate and DVD sales and all of that, which is, it's just phenomenal to me. It's amazing. Every day I have to pinch myself to remind myself that I am really here doing this for a living, which is incredible, and something that I don't take for granted, because I realize at any other time in human history, there's no way I could have been doing what I'm doing right now, speaking to however many tens of thousands of people on a weekly basis, and with all of this support from people all around the world. It is truly amazing what is possible right now in this window of opportunity, and I don't know how long it'll be possible, but I'm trying to make the most of it while it is.
What was your motivation to begin? What happened?
I guess you could say anger, in a way. Basically anger that a lot of this information that I was suddenly coming across in 2006 when I started looking into some of this stuff, I just wasn't seeing it reflected anywhere in the mainstream media, in the education system. And in my entire life, I'd never heard any of this type of talk about, what is the Federal Reserve? Where is money created? How does this all happen? What, false flag terrorism, all these things I'd never heard about, and I wasn't seeing them discussed at all, let alone discussed seriously in the mainstream. And that was just bewildering to me and enraging. And I thought, well, here we are. It's the internet age. Why not actually put some of this stuff out there? And I had no idea that it would become what it's become, and the Corbett Report would be what it is. But here I am, and I'm so glad that I did seize that moment of opportunity, because I can't even imagine what it would be like if I was still thinking of myself as a spectator to all of this, just passively waiting for some mainstream establishment mouthpiece puppet broadcaster to suddenly start talking about all this. I mean, that would just be so depressing. I couldn't even imagine that. And that's why I think I'm such a proselytizer for what's possible if more people started getting involved in this. Because I've seen it from my perspective, going from a spectator being angry and, screaming at the idiot box to being a participant in a worldwide conversation and helping to shape that conversation. That's a pretty transformative thing. And it shows from my own side that it is possible to actually start shaping the world rather than simply watching it unfold. And once you get into that mentality, it's addictive. And how could you ever go back to just simply watching as things unfold rather than realizing you are an active participant in the creation of history?
One time, my money ran out, and my wife told me, Vinny, you have to go get a job. So I go, all right. And I go down to my best mate, Jono, and he gives me a job selling insulation for houses, door-to-door knocking. And the night before, I was sitting in bed thinking about the morning, getting up, going to work, putting on a suit, and then going and selling products that I don't really agree with. In some cases, they were like toxic. And I actually had a panic attack. It was really quite traumatic for me. And so I called my mate in the middle of the night and just said, bro, I can't turn out to work. I have to find some other way. And then I begged my listeners, like literally begged them to bail me out. And they did. And I think it was at that moment that I realized that I'm totally employer-phobic, a fear of gainful employment, and that because I do so much for so many people, I mean, just the guests alone, the amount of guests that I have on the show that I give coverage to and are very friendly with in general, just that alone garners me a lot of street cred and a lot of support. And I realized that this isn't something that I'm going to be doing temporarily. This is something that I am now obligated to do permanently because I have the resources and the experience to do it when nobody else in New Zealand does.
And think about that for a second. I mean, you didn't want to go and dress up and be a shill for some company, for some product that you don't care about. And I look at it that way when it comes to the media that I'm producing. People, basically, since I started the website, they're always saying, oh, so you're going to put advertising up, right? You're going to do an advertising model. And I've never wanted to do that, and I've always said no. And I've never had advertising on the website, and I never will. And people kind of find that amazing. To me, it's just logical. Why would I spend all this time putting my blood, sweat, and tears into creating and crafting all this media, only to just hand it over to some company to shill their product to my listeners? That's ridiculous. We live in an age where I'm talking directly to people who are listening directly to me. There's no corporate middleman or what have you in between us. They can support me if they like the work. And that's the model going forward. That's the peer-to-peer economy, which is developing, which is truly, I think, going to transform the nature of the economy that we're living through. You don't have to sell out to some third-party corporation. You can do it directly, and you can be supported directly by the people who appreciate your work. That is transformative. That is wonderful. That's something we have to embrace and I think push through to its logical conclusion.
This is the new business model, and it is working. Many people have proved that it works, and yet others do not accept that fact, do not accept that reality, and continue, however, to make all those calls, get all those advertisers, sign all those contracts, and basically spend a good portion of the minutes out of every single one of your broadcasts. And I've listened to some radio shows where the segment doesn't even last 5 minutes, James. You know, it's unbelievable. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the final segment of the Vinnie Eastwood Show with my very special guest, James Corbett. Now, I've been trying to think, you know, what are my guests passionate about? And I found the easiest way to figure that out is to frickin' ask him. And what we were talking about over the break was this peer-to-peer economy. We mentioned it in the previous segment, but it's worthy of expansion because ultimately it's not controlled by the criminal bankers to a large degree, and that's nice. That's a solution-oriented thing, isn't it? Imagine if you could change the direction of the entire economy. Yeah,
imagine, and you can. We don't have to imagine. It's happening. Whether you're a part of it or not, it's happening, and that's the exciting thing to me. I mean, could it? That's the thing. You say it's not controlled by the banksters or what have you. Well, it could be, and some aspects of it already are being co-opted in that way. But the point is that the beauty of the peer-to-peer economy is that it is what we make it. It is us. It is us directly participating and connecting with each other. So for people who don't know, peer-to-peer economy, this is not a new term. I didn't coin it. It's been around for a while, but I suppose independently coined it. I did a podcast episode recently that was based on an article I wrote a few months ago about the peer-to-peer economy, and I was just looking for a way of kind of encapsulating a number of different things that are going on in the economy right now because of various technological developments and also some transformations in consciousness in some ways about what the economy is and how it functions. And so I hit upon peer-to-peer, which of course takes its analogy from computer networking, where a peer-to-peer network is a network where there is no central server through which all the information has to be passed. A peer-to-peer network, basically all the points on the node can connect to each other directly and share information directly with each other, rather than going through a central server. So in my podcast episode that I recently had up about this, I put the analogy out there that it's like, if you look at the Industrial Revolution and the way that changed society, what it fundamentally did was create these sort of central servers in the economy, which were the factories, where all of the materials had to be flown in from wherever, points thousands of miles away in some cases, and congregated in this one spot. And then, of course, all the workers would have to go to this central server factory to congregate to do the work. And then the products would be shipped out all over the world to the various nodes of the network. And that was the type of network economy that existed in the industrial era. We don't need to do that anymore. And that idea, that model, is already being dismantled through a lot of different developments. But you can look at things like additive manufacturing, aka 3D printing, and things like that are completely transforming the idea of what it means to even create products. I mean, real, physical, actual products, let alone things like what we're doing, the information that's being passed around in the economy right now. And because of this, and because of things like a million different websites and platforms you could think of right now, they're completely transforming the ways that we relate to each other, rather than basically being cogs in a machine, working at factories, doing some soul-depriving assembly line type of job, or working in a corporate office, working at some cubicle, life-depriving type of job. We are now at the point where we can literally interact with people directly, one-on-one, and through that we can think of all sorts of different ways to not only just do business. I mean, of course you can do business in that way, in a conventional sense, and you could think of something like an eBay or whatever, which is really just a conventional way of having a flea market, I guess, but throughout the entire world, so you have a pretty large customer base. And unfortunately, eBay is basically, if you look into the founders and the corporate backing and all of that, I mean, it's a horrible company, and I don't really like it. But anyway, it's a good idea. And but of course, there's those types of businesses. But there's also different ways of conceptualizing how to even consume or use or create products in this economy. So we have the idea of collaborative consumption. Basically, does everyone on your block need to own a stepladder or some of these other tools and instruments that you may use once or twice a year? Well, of course not. But how do you go about coordinating the sharing of such items through a community? Well, now that's easier than ever. You can have, and there are websites like NeighborGoods, I think it's neighborgoods.com, where you can coordinate sharing all sorts of kitchen appliances and tools and household goods among communities, and you can just share them with your neighbors rather than everyone owning one. That is a fundamental transformation in the economy that is taking place right now. And of course, people know about the ride-sharing apps and those types of things that are coming up now that are completely undermining taxi companies and hotel chains and all of these other businesses that have been entrenched in the public consciousness for so long, because how else can you do it? Well, you can do it directly between people. Hey, I've got space in my car, you're going to the place I'm going to, let's share. So that's transforming it. And there's also, I mean, incredible things that are happening in terms of collaborative communities for production, peer production that's taking place, where you have projects like Local Motors or OS Vehicle, where you have designers from all over the world contributing to open source projects to create blueprints, downloadable open source blueprints for roadworthy vehicles. You can literally download a car, or at least the blueprints for one, now, because of these open source communities that are coming together to design all sorts of things. So I can't stress just how transformative all of these things are. And of course, there's going to be kickback and regulations and what have you. But I really don't think that the genie can be fully stuffed back into this bottle. And we've reached a point where the limit is on our own imaginations and what we are willing or able to do with it. Everyone who is listening to this right now has something that they do, something that they want to do, something that they think is their real talent. Hopefully there are people out there who are doing it right now. But for those who aren't, whether it's, I don't know, writing a poem or playing a song or creating a little knick-knack or googad, it's never been easier to share that with people all around the world, or to sell it in a business type concern or what have you. That is the peer-to-peer economy. And it's not just economic, it's not just technological, it's a question of how society itself is ordered, how we relate to each other, the types of interactions we have as human beings, which is really what the basis of what economy really is.
And I think that what's happened in terms of the current economy is it's been taken out of people's hands. Like, I remember I was having a discussion with a financial researcher, And he was noting that Duncan Garner, who's our political editor and our economic reporter here in New Zealand, he went over to the United States accompanying the Prime Minister John Key, who's a former Federal Reserve derivatives trader, and was sitting in a conversation with John Key and Tim Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury or whatever he was. And Duncan Garner says, well, when those guys get talking about that, then it's just a whole different form of language. And it's like, he doesn't even understand it. He's supposed to be the reporter for everybody to understand the economy, and he doesn't even understand the stuff that he's reporting on, right? And I think it's like, whoa. People have created a whole bunch of BS wankery in order to conceal their crimes. And that's pretty much the economy in a nutshell. It's a really complicated crime.
That's it. You're exactly right. It is. It is a crime that's been perpetrated and refined for centuries. And of course, they've got their own lingo to basically pull the wool over everyone's eyes. But it does basically boil down to that. It was a crime that's been instituted in the era of central banking, where the central bankers and their cronies can literally dictate the entire economy by simply manipulating the money supply, which is the most insidious way to do it, because hardly one person in 10,000 could even fathom that, let alone understand how it really works. So it's a really effective system, and it is starting to be exposed, and some of the information is starting to be shared around, but still a lot of people are in the dark about that. And people ask, when they start to find out about this, well, they think, well, what can you do? I mean, you need a bank account. You need to work in this economy. You need these types of fiat pieces of paper that they tell you is money. Well, no, you don't. You really don't. And less and less so as time goes on. I mean, not only are there whatever precious metals or cryptocurrencies or all the other things that you can do to get around the fiat money system, but there's also now there's lending club and things like this, peer-to-peer lending that's going on, where you don't need to go to a bank to try to get money for a mortgage or what have you. You can literally source it from people in your community, or people that you know, or people that you trust, or people or complete strangers, depending on what kind of risks and what kind of things you're willing to get involved with. But it does exist now. I mean, we really literally don't need these banker middlemen for anything at this point. It's just a question of how far we're willing to push this.
Yeah, we should just go directly to the source. And isn't that part of the internet economy now? Open source software, open source this, that, and the other. And these people who've created these programs, like one that I like in particular, and it's great for Mac users, is called SMC Fan Control. It installs into your computer, and then there's a little tab up the top near your clock where you can click it open, and you can actually turn the fans of your computer up. So when you're working really, really hard, like through the night or something, and your computer's starting to overheat, you can just crank the fans up full, and the computer goes like the whole time, man. It's so awesome for working. And,
can you make that sound again? That's a great fan sound.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's almost as good as a stadium full of fans. But
remarkably similar.
Yes. Now, I think we're coming straight to the end of the segment now, James. So I want to thank you very much for tuning up, and, of course, give you a little bit of promo here. Go to his website, ladies and gentlemen, thecorbettreport.com, or just search Corbett Report and get yourself some information today. And it's fun, and if you like it, you can support him. And also for those of you who like to support me, and the whole reason of this show isn't really, credible journalism. It's incredible journalism. I'm here to make it fun because, let's face it, the truth can be really quite stressful and depressing sometimes. And unless you're able to make really terrible jokes about it, it will make you feel really terrible. You know what I'm saying? So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for supporting me. Thank you very much for all of those who support James as well. And we shall see you again sometime, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. I'd like to just hear from you a little bit about who you are and what you do for those who are uninitiated. And I also want to make the point, ladies and gentlemen, you really want to search for a James Corbett video about 9/11. It's just a fantastic job you've done there, bro.
Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah, for people who don't know, I'm James Corbett. I'm at CorbettReport.com. I've been working in Japan for 11 years now. This is my 11th year, and I've been doing the Corbett Report since 2007. It originally started out, it was just going to be a weekly podcast, but it quickly became interviews and articles and videos, and it's just expanded and expanded since then, and now I'm writing for the International Forecaster. I have another website, FukushimaUpdate.com, talking about the latest at the Fukushima Daiichi plant. I do all sorts of video reports for Boiling Frogs Post and Global Research TV and other places. So I'm a little bit of everywhere. I hope you've found me online somewhere before, even if you didn't know it was me.
I wanted to actually hear a little bit about Fukushima because I've heard a lot of things. Now, first story that I hear is it's real bad, everything's screwed, it's virtual extinction level event, ranging from all the way to, oh, there's absolutely no radiation and that's completely fine. What do you think?
Yeah, oddly enough, I fall somewhere in between that. No, I don't believe this is extinction level event. No, I do not believe everything is peachy keen. And basically, what should people believe? Well, how about looking at some of the evidence for what actually exists? So it has been confirmed that the radioactive plume has reached the West Coast. And so this has been confirmed by testing by an independent organization called Our Radioactive Ocean that's being organized. It's being basically crowdfunded to do testing off of the west coast of the United States.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the fastest 2 hours in talk radio. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show. Just because we're being exterminated doesn't mean we can't make it fun. Otherwise, what's the point of being killed? And my very special guest joining me now is James Corbett of the Corbett Report, not to be confused with Eddie Murphy's Norbert Report. James, welcome to the program.
Or the Colbert Report, which thankfully I outlasted him. I showed him who's boss.
Yeah. He probably had to do a cold beer report after that one to drink away his sorrows. Scumbag. Anyway.
It's because there is no agency of the U.S. or Canadian government that is currently actively involved in testing the Western Pacific. So this has absolutely confirmed the radioactive plume has reached the west coast of North America as expected. But the levels of radiation that have been detected are, well, I mean, extremely low, and people can look into that for themselves and come to their own conclusions. But I've got a bunch of information up on that about that on FukushimaUpdate.com. I think a great video that really puts it into perspective is called Fukushima West Coast Impact. It's by Goddard's Journal. And it has links to a couple of dozen different studies that have been done, and basically talking about dosages and how much has been detected and how much is likely to do damage. Puts it into perspective, historically speaking, back when they were doing open atmospheric testing out in the Pacific, what were the levels back then, and how does that compare to what we find now with Fukushima? Basically, the people, I think, who were making the extinction level die-off, everything's going to hell in a handbasket type of claims, have greatly exaggerated a lot of this and have used a lot of faulty information in the past and never retracted their claims. So I think there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes on. And why not? It's ka-ching, ka-ching, because obviously people who are seeking out alternative media love to hear some of the fear porn and doom and gloom, and will tend to believe that without much presentation of evidence. So I get why that happens. On the other side of things, of course, TEPCO and the Japanese government wants to downplay the situation as much as possible and makes everything sound like it's wonderful and tickety-boo because, they've got the 2020 Olympics coming up and all of this, where they're going to try to convince the world that everything's under control. Whereas we do have radioactive water leaking out from the site on a daily basis.